On the 25th of October 2016, at the Dreamworld theme park in Australia, a river rapids ride malfunctioned. The failure of a water pump precipitated a deadly accident that claimed 4 lives in a matter of moments, an accident which, later investigation would reveal, could have been prevented. Dreamworld was opened in 1981 with a modest collection of attractions. These included an IMAX theatre, a model train, a log flume, and a vintage car ride. Over the decades that followed, the park grew steadily, acquiring several roller coasters, a wildlife park, and numerous other rides. Sections of the park were developed with different themes in mind. The DreamWorks Experience Zone, for example, featured several attractions that tied in with popular DreamWorks films, such as Kung Fu Panda and Madagascar. The Town of Gold Rush zone was themed after the Australian gold rushes of the 1800s. The Thunder River Rapids ride was one of the main attractions situated there when the zone opened in 1986. The basic design of the ride might be familiar to any theme park enthusiast, as it resembles hundreds of other river rapids rides around the world. Many rides of this type in other parks are designed and built by Intamin, a well-known and reputable ride design and manufacturing company. The river rapids ride at Dreamworld, however, was custom built by the park itself. Riders at Dreamworld would board circular 6-person rafts from a constantly rotating station platform, which allowed easy boarding without boats having to come to a complete stop. Once dispatched, each raft would travel at a modest pace along a watercourse that included a tunnel and several sections of simulated whitewater rapids. Boats were bumped, jostled, and splashed unpredictably as they moved along a curving channel. Part of the fun of the ride arose from the fact that some riders would inevitably get wetter than others. The course of the ride was on a gentle downward gradient. This was what caused the water within the channel to flow, thus conveying the boats along without the need for an onboard propulsion system. Naturally, this meant that, by the end of the ride, rafts would need to be lifted back up to the station before they could be sent around again. At Dreamworld, this was achieved by means of a conveyor belt. Boats were guided onto it and carried upwards with guests still on board. When it reached the top and returned to the station, guests would disboard back onto the rotating station platform. Just as the rafts needed to be lifted back up at the end of a circuit, so too did the water, something normally achieved by 2 powerful water pumps. On the 25th of October 2016, one of these pumps failed, which caused the water level in the ride to drop significantly. This resulted in a raft which had just reached the top of the conveyor belt becoming stranded on support rails. There wasn't enough water in the channel to carry it onwards, and so it was stuck just short of the ride station. The conveyor belt, however, continued to move, carrying up another raft. This raft, holding 6 guests, collided with Raft 1, causing both to pivot upwards. Raft 1 fell back into a horizontal position, while the continued movement of the conveyor belt forced Raft 2 into a vertical position. 4 of the occupants of Raft 2 were thrown out and onto the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt was, at this stage, still moving. The victims were either dragged beneath the stranded raft and crushed, or fell through the gaps in the belt and became trapped in the machinery beneath. All 4 of them were killed. There were 2 survivors from Raft 2, both children. They were able to cling onto the raft even in its vertical position, and later clamber to safety once the conveyor belt had stopped. The ride was evacuated, and the park closed as a recovery operation took place. Even once all the water had been drained from the ride, it took until the next morning to retrieve the bodies. The process of doing so was so traumatic that some of the paramedics involved required counselling once it was complete. The park remained closed for a month, both out of respect for the dead and to allow an investigation to be completed. The results of this investigation would take several years to emerge, but when they did, they were damning. There had been a litany of failures on the part of the park. Rudimentary safety features had not been implemented on the ride, even though they would have been extremely inexpensive. There was no automatic water level indicator, for example. No holistic risk assessment had been completed, and the task of identifying risks was left to the staff of the ride, none of them trained engineers. Maintenance staff did not know the location of the emergency stop button in the main control room, and never tested it. Improvements to safety features were deferred because of budgetary concerns. Record keeping was described as shoddy. The ride was described as completely unsafe, and it was concluded that there had been failures on the part of everybody at the park. It is important to note that these criticisms were directed specifically at the Dreamworld Thunder River Rapids ride. Other rides of this type, when properly managed and risk assessed, are extremely safe for guests. Dreamworld cooperated fully with the investigation, and when charges were finally laid against them under the Work Health and Safety Act in July 2020, they pled guilty without hesitation. The parent company of the theme park, Ardent Leisure, received a fine of $3.6 million, the largest fine ever handed out for a workplace tragedy in Queensland. The ride itself was demolished in November 2016, and Dreamworld plans to build a memorial garden in its place. They have invited those affected by the tragedy to be involved in its design, an offer which has angered some of the survivors' families, as they are still awaiting actual compensation from the park. The victims of this disaster included Kate Goodchild, who boarded the ride with her 12-year-old daughter, her brother Luke Dorset, and his partner Rusbeh Aragi. Kate's daughter was the only one from that group to survive. Also killed was Cindy Lowe. Her 10-year-old son was the only other survivor from the affected raft. All 4 victims were on holiday. They had visited Dreamworld to experience its rides and roller coasters, fully believing that these attractions were safe. This was a reasonable belief, as many regulatory standards exist to ensure that amusement park rides are as safe as possible. The incident at Dreamworld, which cost them their lives, shows, however, that these standards can only work when ride owners and operators actually deign to apply them. Dreamworld overhauled its safety procedures across the park and reopened a month after the tragedy. It has continued to operate ever since. The site of the Thunder River Rapids ride is currently vacant. The construction of the Memorial Garden is currently on hold.